They saw a quiet woman who never raised her voice. They mistook her silence for surrender. Grant Ashford stood at the front of the courtroom that morning, certain he had already won. He had the lawyers. He had the hidden accounts. He had spent 12 years telling Claire, in 100 small ways, that she was lucky he'd chosen her at all. He believed she was exactly what she appeared to be. A soft-spoken woman from a small town in Ohio, grateful for the life he'd given her, and far too gentle to ever fight back. He never once asked who her father really was before he retired. He never asked why her brother never seemed to need a job that paid him by the hour. He never asked why Claire, despite growing up with so little, always knew exactly which fork to use, exactly how to read a room, exactly when to stay silent and when silence was its own kind of power. By the time the elevator doors opened and her family walked into that courthouse, Grant Ashford's entire life was already collapsing, and he didn't even know it yet. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The end of the marriage began on a Tuesday morning that looked like every other Tuesday morning. It was the 9th of September, and the light coming through the tall windows of the Ashford estate in Greenwich, Connecticut was pale and gray, the kind of light that made the polished floors look colder than they already were. Grant Ashford sat at the head of the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone, a plate of untouched eggs in front of him. He did not look up when Claire walked in. He rarely did anymore. For 12 years, Claire had learned to read the temperature of a room before she ever spoke a word in it, and that morning the room felt different. Grant slid a folder across the table without ceremony. "We need to talk about the future," he said, still looking at his phone. Claire opened the folder and found divorce papers already drafted, already signed on his side, waiting only for her signature to become real. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She sat very still, the way she had learned to sit still through a decade of small humiliations, and she read every line. Grant finally looked up when her silence stretched too long for his comfort. "Don't make this difficult, Claire," he said. "I've been fair. You get the lake house in Vermont, a car, and support for 18 months. After that, you're on your own." He said it the way a man might announce a corporate restructuring, calm, rehearsed, already finished with the conversation in his mind. Claire closed the folder slowly. "Is there someone else, Grant?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He didn't bother denying it. "Her name is Bianca. She understands my world in ways you never tried to." The word "tried" landed like a slap, though his voice never rose above a murmur. Claire had spent 12 years building a life around a man who measured love in real estate and quarterly earnings. She had hosted his investors, raised his son from his first marriage as her own, and quietly absorbed insult after insult dressed up as honesty. She had watched him disappear for long weekends labeled as business trips to Miami, had seen the charges on statements he thought she never checked, and had said nothing, not because she was weak, but because she was waiting. Grant believed her silence was proof that she had nothing to fight with. He believed the story she told him when they met, that she was a schoolteacher's daughter from a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio, with no family money and no family name worth mentioning. That story was true. It was simply incomplete. What Grant never bothered to learn was that Claire's father, Walter Doyle, had spent 31 years as a federal judge in the Southern District of Ohio before retiring, presiding over some of the largest financial fraud cases in the state's history. He never learned that Claire's younger brother, Nathan Doyle, had built a career as a forensic accountant specializing in exposing exactly the kind of shell companies and offshore transfers that men like Grant relied on to hide money from their wives, their partners, and the federal government. Grant had never asked because he had never imagined Claire came from anything worth asking about. He assumed her quiet manners were the manners of someone grateful simply to be in the room. He was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. After Grant left for his office that morning, Claire sat alone in the enormous kitchen that had never once felt like home. She reached for a phone that was not the one Grant had given her. A prepaid phone she had kept hidden in a shoebox at the back of her closet for the past 8 months. Ever since the night she found hotel receipts from a Miami trip Grant claimed was in Chicago. She dialed a number from memory. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice steady and unhurried. the voice of a man who had spent decades listening to lawyers try to talk their way around the truth. "Dad," Claire said, and for the first time in years she let her voice sound exactly as tired as she felt. "He filed. He's trying to leave me with almost nothing, and there's another woman." Walter Doyle was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into the register Claire remembered from childhood, the one he used only when he meant every word. 12 years I've watched that man look through you like you were furniture, Claire," he said. 12 years I've held my tongue because you asked me to. I won't hold it any longer. Get Nathan on the phone. We're coming to Connecticut, and we're not coming as your family. We're coming as your legal team." Claire felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in months. A tightness she had carried so long she had almost stopped noticing it. "I need everything documented first, Dad," she said. "Every account, every trip, every dollar. Give me 3 weeks. Her father's answer was simple. "Take 4. Do it right." Over the following weeks, Claire became someone Grant had never met, though she had lived inside the same house as him the entire time. She began organizing his office under the guise of spring cleaning, photographing documents left carelessly on his desk, backing up files from a shared cloud account he had never bothered to secure. She learned the names of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. She learned about a consulting arrangement paying $11,000 a month to a company called Bianca Voss owned, unsurprisingly, by a woman named Bianca Voss. She smiled at dinner parties, poured wine for his business partners, and said nothing, all while quietly building a case her brother would later call the most thorough forensic trail he had ever seen handed to him by a client. Nathan Doyle flew into New York 11 days after that first phone call, carrying a laptop, 2 external hard drives, and a folder of preliminary findings that made even his own eyebrows rise. Over dinner at a quiet diner in White Plains, away from anywhere Grant might recognize them, Nathan laid out what he had found so far. Grant's declared net worth on the prenuptial agreement was $42 million. Nathan's early estimate, based on transfers Claire had photographed and property records he had pulled himself, put the real figure closer to $190 million, spread across shell companies, undisclosed real estate holdings in Florida, and a cryptocurrency wallet Grant had never mentioned to anyone, including his own accountant. "He's not just hiding money from you, Claire," Nathan said. "He's hiding it from the IRS too. This isn't a divorce case anymore. This is a criminal case wearing a divorce case's clothes." 3 weeks later, the marble hallway outside Courtroom 4B in the Connecticut Superior Court was heavy with the particular tension of people who had rehearsed very different versions of the same day. Grant sat on a bench beside his attorney, a sharp-suited man named Preston Kane who billed $1,200 an hour and had never lost a divorce case involving a client worth more than $10 million. "She'll show up with some overwhelmed legal aid attorney," Preston said, adjusting his cufflinks. "We'll bury her in paperwork before lunch." Grant checked his watch. "She actually asked to negotiate custody of Tyler," he said, referring to his teenage son from his first marriage, whom Claire had raised since he was 6 years old. "As if she has any legal standing at all." Preston chuckled. "They always think they do. Then they see our fee schedule and fold." The elevator chimed at the end of the hall, and Grant barely glanced up, expecting nothing more than the sad, familiar sight of a woman about to lose everything. Instead, 2 men in dark, tailored suits stepped out first, moving with the composed alertness of professionals who had done this before, though they were not lawyers. Then Claire stepped between them, and Grant's confident expression faltered for the first time all morning. Gone was the soft cardigan and quiet posture he had grown used to. Claire wore a charcoal-tailored suit, her hair pulled back sharply, a leather portfolio held against her side like a shield. Behind her walked an older man with silver hair and a cane he did not lean on, and beside him, a broad-shouldered man carrying a heavy case that landed with a thud when Nathan set it down. Preston Kane's confident expression drained from his face in real time. "Who is that?" Grant whispered, though something in his stomach had already begun to answer the question before Preston spoke. "That's Walter Doyle," Preston said, his voice suddenly quiet. "Grant, that man spent 3 decades on the federal bench prosecuting financial fraud before he retired. Judges in this state still send him Christmas cards out of fear. Grant felt his mouth go dry. "You told me her family taught elementary school," he said. "I told you what you assumed," Preston snapped, losing his composure for the first time in the 11 years Grant had known him. "And the man beside him is her brother, Nathan Doyle. He doesn't argue cases. He builds them. He testifies as an expert witness in federal fraud trials. If he's carrying a case into this courtroom, Grant, it isn't empty." Claire stopped 10 feet away and lowered her sunglasses, her eyes calm in a way Grant had never seen directed at him before. "Hello, Grant," she said, and her voice carried clearly down the marble hallway, no longer soft, no longer careful. "Claire," Grant said, forcing bravado into his tone. "Bringing your father to intimidate me? That's beneath even you." Walter Doyle stepped forward without raising his voice, though the hallway seemed to quiet around him anyway. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "you spent 12 years believing my daughter's patience was weakness. You are about to learn it was preparation." Nathan set the case down and opened it. "The prenuptial agreement lists your net worth at $42 million, he said. "Our preliminary audit puts it closer to 190. Hiding marital assets during divorce proceedings is fraud, Grant. And that's the smallest problem you have this morning." Inside courtroom 4B, Judge Miriam Calloway took her seat with the unhurried authority of someone who had spent 20 years watching wealthy men try to outlawyer their own consequences. She reviewed the initial filings, noted the presence of Walter Doyle appearing alongside Claire's attorney, and allowed herself the faintest raise of an eyebrow before calling the docket to order. Preston Kane opened with the prenuptial agreement, attempting to invoke an infidelity clause that would void Claire's spousal support entirely, presenting surveillance photographs of Claire meeting privately, over several weeks, with a man named Ethan Reyes. Grant watched with satisfaction as the photographs were entered into evidence, certain this single maneuver would end the case before it truly began, certain that whatever dignity Claire had walked in with would collapse under the weight of public exposure. Claire rose slowly, unbothered, and asked Preston a single question before responding to the accusation directly. "Did your investigators run a background check on Mr. Reyes before photographing him with me?" Preston hesitated. "Relevant checks were made," he said carefully. "Then you'd know," Claire said, "that Ethan Reyes has been married to his husband Marcus for 6 years. She placed a certified marriage record on the evidence table. Those meetings were planning sessions for a surprise anniversary party for Grant and me. For the anniversary he missed because he told me he was in Chicago, when in fact hotel records place him in Miami with Ms. Voss." The courtroom went still. Grant's jaw tightened as 12 years of careful appearances began to crack in front of the one audience he had never expected to see them. Nathan stood next, projecting a financial timeline onto the courtroom screen that traced 18 months of transfers totaling nearly $200,000 into an account belonging to Bianca Voss Consulting, a company with no clients, no invoices, and no purpose beyond receiving Grant's money. He traced those funds further, into a Tribeca apartment purchased through a shell company connected directly to Grant's real estate firm, a transaction that constituted, in the state of Connecticut, wasteful dissipation of marital assets. Judge Calloway's expression hardened as the pattern became undeniable, line by line, transfer by transfer, until the courtroom understood exactly what kind of case had walked through those doors that morning, wearing the quiet, unremarkable face of a woman everyone had underestimated for over a decade. Preston requested a recess to review the evidence, his voice noticeably thinner than it had been an hour before. Judge Calloway granted 1 hour, warning Grant directly that any attempt to move funds during the recess would result in immediate contempt proceedings. As the gavel struck, Grant stood on unsteady legs, his mind racing through numbers, contacts, and the sudden, dawning realization that the woman he had dismissed at his own breakfast table 3 weeks earlier had spent that entire time building a case capable of ending not just his marriage, but his career, his freedom, and everything he had built his identity around. Claire did not watch him leave. She gathered her papers with the same steady calm she had carried since walking through the courthouse doors, her father's hand resting briefly on her shoulder in quiet, unspoken pride. Outside the courthouse, the recess Grant had hoped would offer relief instead delivered its own kind of collapse. Reporters, tipped off by sources no one would ever officially confirm, swarmed the granite steps the moment Grant stepped outside, shouting questions about hidden accounts and federal exposure that he had no answers for. He fled to his office at Ashford Development, expecting the comfort of familiar walls, only to find the board chairman waiting in his own chair, a printed copy of Nathan's forensic findings already spread across the desk. "The partners have seen this," the chairman said flatly. "You used company infrastructure to conceal personal assets. That exposes this entire firm to liability, Grant. You're suspended, effective immediately." Grant's protests died in his throat as security escorted him out of a building that no longer felt like his. He went next to Bianca's apartment, the one his own money had purchased, expecting comfort, expecting loyalty, expecting the one person who had chosen him to still be choosing him now. Instead he found her packing frantically, suitcases already half full, her expression sharp with panic rather than affection. "They froze the accounts, Grant," she said, not looking up. "My cousin works in compliance. Your name is already flagged. I'm not going down with you." He reminded her that he had bought her this apartment, that he had built her a life. "And her lawyers will take it back by Monday," Bianca said, pulling her coat on. "I was with you because you were winning, Grant. You're not winning anymore." The door closed behind her before he could find the words to stop her, leaving him alone in a home built entirely on money that no longer belonged to him. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, requesting a meeting at a hotel suite to discuss a settlement, signed simply, Claire. He arrived soaked from the rain, stripped of his office, his mistress, and his composure, to find Claire, Walter, and Nathan waiting in a suite that smelled faintly of coffee and quiet resolve. Claire slid a single document across the table, not a request, but terms. Full custody of Tyler, a waiver of parental rights, a signed statement acknowledging the securities violations Nathan's audit had uncovered, in exchange for Claire's recommendation of leniency to federal investigators already building a criminal case against him. "You're going to face charges regardless, Grant," Walter said quietly. "The only choice left is how much control you have over how this ends." Grant looked at the pen in front of him, the same brand he had used to sign the divorce papers that started this entire collapse 3 weeks earlier, and understood, finally and completely, that the war had never truly been a fair fight, only one he had been too arrogant to see coming. He asked Claire, before signing, whether she had ever actually loved him. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I loved the man I thought you were when we met, Grant. The one who talked about building something real instead of something that just looked real. I'm not sure that man ever existed outside of the story you told me to get me to marry you." He signed the papers with a trembling hand, and the moment the ink dried, the last of his leverage disappeared entirely. He was arrested in the hotel elevator less than 10 minutes after leaving the suite, federal agents waiting quietly, badges ready, the culmination of a case built not by prosecutors, but by a wife, a retired judge, and a forensic accountant who had simply refused to let arrogance go unanswered. 6 months later, Grant Ashford stood before Judge Calloway again, no longer in a tailored suit but in a state-issued jumpsuit, sentenced to 60 months in federal prison for securities fraud and wire fraud, his empire dismantled, his name a cautionary headline in every business publication that had once profiled him as a rising star. He scanned the gallery for Claire's face one final time, searching for some acknowledgement that he still mattered to someone. Her seat remained empty. She had made it clear, through her attorney, that her involvement had ended the moment the settlement was signed. 300 miles away, in the quiet hills outside Columbus, Ohio, Claire sat on her parents' porch wrapped in a wool blanket, watching Tyler chase her father's old dog across a frost-covered lawn. His laughter loud and unguarded in a way it had never been allowed to be inside the Ashford estate. Her father joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, mentioning quietly that the sentencing had made the evening news. Claire felt no triumph, no lingering anger, only a deep and unfamiliar stillness. "I thought staying so long made me weak," she said softly. Walter shook his head. "You weren't weak, Claire. You were gathering strength. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It waits." Nathan arrived days later with the finalized trust documents securing Tyler's future entirely, along with news that Claire's new consulting practice, helping other women untangle hidden marital assets, already had its first 3 clients lined up. Claire Ashford had spent 12 years being underestimated by a man who mistook her quiet nature for emptiness, who never once wondered what silence like hers might actually be building underneath the surface. In the end, Grant lost his fortune, his freedom, and the family he never fully valued while he had it. All because he never bothered to ask who his wife truly was before deciding she was someone he could dismiss. It's a reminder that quiet does not mean powerless, and patience is not the same thing as surrender. You never know who is sitting across the table from you, or what they are truly capable of once they finally decide enough is enough. I hope this story reminded you that strength doesn't always announce itself loudly, and that the quietest people in the room are often the ones paying the closest attention. If Claire's story moved you the way it moved me while writing it, let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest. And if you love stories about patience, justice, and women who finally stand up for themselves, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.